Welcome to Conservatives Talk.
And today, let's talk about how these pro-abortion mobsters are the new domestic terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2022 is baby formula the same issue that we had in 2020 with toilet paper. Is that crisis going to be continued, or are we going to be able to put a stop to it? And is the Green New Deal actually the demise of America?
In all honesty, I think that it is sealing the demise. So I agree with you 100% on that one.
So let's get into it.
Absolutely. So stay tuned and continue listening. And welcome back to Conservatives Talk. And as always, we like to always start the show off by saying, please continue to like and share all the content that you run across from our show. And make sure you hit the subscribe button as well. That way we're able to really expand everything that we're doing. And if you have the option and the means and the availabilities, please go to conservativestalk.org, and it is posted on your screen there, and hit the sponsor tab in the top right-hand corner or the bottom right-hand corner to be able to help us to be able to produce more content and get it on a larger, wide-scale availability. So
absolutely,
that's really the lifeblood on us being able to push a lot of this.
Yeah, and we can't continue to do this without you guys. And thank you for our sponsors already.
Yes.
we continually can produce content because of you all and your sponsorships. We also want to remind you, as always, we're getting even closer. We're now 3 days away from the Republican primary. So always remember that we got to get out and vote. That's the key. And we are there's my drum roll. We're 173 days away until we beat Stacey Abrams again.
Absolutely. Better words could not have been said. So and to really go back into what Jamie had just said, you have to please make sure that you go out to the polls and express your opinion on what conservative or what Republican candidate needs to be running for office and for 2020 when it comes down to the general in November.
And we've given you
this decision's made
some idea of what we think on the show. We've did a segment on who all's running and what for office, especially in Northwest Georgia, but is Georgia at large and some of the statewide races. But your opinion matters.
Yes,
and regardless of what you think about our elections, we can't do anything unless we flood the polls.
Absolutely. So that kind of rolls into another topic that we were going to be discussing, and essentially we took a break last week because we were really gathering and waiting for a lot of information to come in. And at the moment of the airing of this episode, that specific information that we were waiting on has not actually come into our hands at the moment. We are still ongoing and waiting on that. It's just there are some barriers that we're having to overcome in order to get that. So we
have heard you all. We have got your messages. We do know that there are some issues of concern that you all are concerned about throughout Northwest Georgia, especially in some particular counties. And so we will bring those to light once we have that information.
Absolutely. Yeah. We want to do the responsible thing and make sure that we have the accurate information before we actually start bringing you or bringing you conjecture or bringing you speculation or anything, especially regarding this issue, because the last thing that we ever want to do is to suppress the voter turnout because of an ongoing issue, which a lot of people believe that the elections are already tainted, they're already rigged, there are already a lot of issues that are going on with that. And the last thing that we want to do is to compile on top of that without having the accurate information and to really be able to bring you the ability or bring you the knowledge that we have attained from actual official government documentation that shows that what's going on, what the possible remedies are for this, and how we can move forward on this.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to add to that before we really get into the subjects of the day is that I have full faith in our election system. especially now that SB 202 has been enacted in the state of Georgia. And I think our elections are more secure than they have ever been throughout the state. But as always, we want to make sure that we are transparent with you all and we bring you proper and accurate information.
It is because of SB 202 that we're able to procure this information that we're wanting to bring to you.
So that being said, let's roll in, let's roll into the first topic.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about these mobsters.
So we covered on one of our last shows the releasing of the preliminary U.S. Supreme Court decision in regard to Roe v. Wade being overturned. Fingers crossed that it will ultimately come to fruition. But at the same time, we are seeing a lot of criminal activity involving around that.
It was like almost instantaneous.
Oh, yes. Literally overnight after that leaked document, they had to erect barricades around the Supreme Court building.
I'm in shock because I saw, me, I love my memes. It was like almost instantly, like someone shared, one of my friends shared something and they said, oh, I didn't know we were back in the mob season, because that's what happened. Like it was like overnight. And, in Washington, D.C., it was literally the same night that this leak occurred. You had mobs starting to form. You had to have, police come in, put up barricades. And then it just, it started to turn ugly over something that just being blunt and honest, that has not even been decided yet. Like, granted, yes, this was an official opinion that was released, so we do see where they're going. We cross our fingers that it's held to that. But this is intimidation factors like we talked about last time.
Absolutely.
And these mobs continue to pop up. And what is our current administration doing about it? Absolutely nothing.
Well, so it all stems back from an issue. So there is a group on social media called Ruth Sent Us. That's what the organization is called. It's called Ruth Sent Us. And they have been organizing and really putting together a lot of information where they are essentially doxing the U.S. Supreme Court justice members. And they're putting out all of their information, where they live, their home addresses, everything. So you have an organization that is putting all this information out there, and you have a very politically and emotionally charged atmosphere. You are essentially creating the summer of love of 2020 again. Except this time, they are not going to be attacking local precincts or anything along that line. They're going to be attacking the U.S. Supreme Court buildings and homes of U.S. Supreme Court justices,
which is awful. And this is
unprecedented.
It's unprecedented. And you know what? This is, the more and more you dabble into it, the more and more you realize how politically staged this is.
Yes.
Because you don't have a leak like that in 200 something years. You ain't never had a leak like that.
Nope.
And then for the first time, the trust inside the Supreme Court has been broken on
Justice
political
Thomas.
bounds.
Well, Justice Thomas actually came out just the other day in a speech he was given and said that this is absolutely unconscionable, that somebody would do something like
and
this.
And he also said that this is not the era of Ruth, because Justice Ruth would have never, Justice Ginsburg would have never allowed for something like this, even if it was, even if she had to write her own dissent that she did not agree with the opinion of the court, she never would have, been okay with something like this happening.
Yeah, well, not just that, but Ginsburg actually came out and prior to her being nominated or being sworn in, had said that Roe was decided on very shaky legal precedent. So she knew firsthand that this was very shaky legal grounds. And then to take it to the next level to where they were leaking these documents for the first time in American history, it really takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah. But again, for those of you who kind of don't know the full magnitude of this, let's just kind of go back to some earlier progressive things that Joe Biden won on. Joe Biden won on this idea from the progressives that at someday he will pack the courts. At someday he will do all these other things like the Green New Deal. We'll get in that later. And you're starting to see remnants of this starting to come out of these policies, which is why his approval rating is tanking.
Yes. Yeah,
because
correct.
all the things that he came out to, and just being honest, those from the right who voted for him and didn't vote for President Trump,
Bet they're regretting that one.
They have to be, because they were like, oh well, y'all are just paranoid. You're paranoid that he's going to do all these things that AOC wants, and all these things that the far left wants, and
we were the great uniter.
We were sitting here telling you that, like, y'all, this is a political ploy. He's trying to say that he's closer to center when really he's just as radical as they are. And then once again, here we go.
He literally took the opposite approach when it comes to running in primary elections. He ran more to the center than he did out to the far left.
Yeah.
And he won that. So he's not governing where he ran at. He is governing opposite of what you would see of that. So typically when you see primary elections,
explain to everyone.
It's the winner of primary elections typically is the furthest person outside of the mainstream area, because a lot of your primary elections are decided upon your really hardcore voters, more or less.
It's because generally what you want to see in a primary is your candidate caters to the overall base. Yes. So you'll start to see,
or at least the most hardcore and continuous voters of the base.
Yes. So you will start to see, and Republicans do it, Democrats do it. In primary elections, you'll see the candidate go, to almost as far left or right extreme, as they can. Yes. And then once they go into the general or get elected, they kind of try to tailor it back to center. And that has been,
that's a truism.
Like you learn that in political science class. That's how you manage campaigns. That's how you get your candidate to campaign in general.
Absolutely.
You just don't want to go, depending on where you are, depends on, how far you need to go.
And Joe Biden has literally flipped
the script because he wanted to pull basically just those who just didn't like Trump.
Mean tweets.
That's it.
Yeah. So one of the, and this may be us going down our proverbial rabbit hole a little bit.
Love the rabbit holes.
So one of the significant factors of this, and the Department of Homeland Security released a memo stating that they are expecting a summer of extreme violence, essentially, and the Biden administration is bracing and preparing for that. And part of that is that they have been receiving an overwhelming number of death threats against specific justices. So think of this: if one or two of these threats come into reality and are carried through and come forth, that's 1 to 2 seats that Joe Biden can then fill with his progressive jurists on these seats.
That's extreme. That is a deep rabbit hole. And the sad part is, if it was something, we'd never know.
Well,
you know how that goes.
Yeah. Well, when they refuse to come out and condemn these flash mobs from protesting and essentially intimidating justices at their homes against federal law, and refuse to prosecute and refuse to arrest these people.
Yeah,
it kind of you can kind of see the writing on the wall with that.
Well, and what I was meaning by that too was if something happens to certain people, there'll always be a car wreck.
Well, yes, or the excuse of there was a single lone crazed act or lone gun or lone wolf type of person that was acting in their crazed capacity.
Burglary gone wrong.
Exactly. Or even still a shooter on the softball practice field.
Yeah, versus what the real target was. But I'm not getting on that rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, it's something that's worth mentioning.
It's something. It is worth mentioning. It's just for people to be mindful. In the future. But the whole premise of that is that the original intent is for them to pack the court.
Yes.
So what they want to do is,
or at least make it very, or maybe not pack it in the sense of getting around Manchin's negative or no vote, to where they can then replace current sitting judge members with more progressive and more liberal.
Well, so here's how I see it in my mind, right? Because I see it as two ways. One is they have to essentially flip 2 judges. in order to change what we saw.
Yes.
So this is one, an intimidation factor.
Mm-hmm.
Two, something like this is released because I want to be very clear. Part of this conversation about Roe v. Wade is the overarching thing of this is not, when we look at the powers of the federal government, this is not something that the federal government should rule on.
No,
this is a states' rights issue because each state is different. This is something that should affect and should be affected or handled on a state by state basis, because we as inside this country and our inner commerce and our inner travel have the right to go and move and live in whatever state we want to, and those like-minded individuals have the right to live and move to whatever state they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So as a state, we have those rights that we as a majority can enact through the power of our assemblies or our legislators or things of that nature, whatever your
our
commonwealth
legislators. Yes.
Yeah. And so that is for your state to decide, not the federal government to make a ruling over all of us. So that's what a lot of people feel that striking down Roe v. Wade is for. The opinion behind it is that it needs to be stricken down from a federal level so that each individual state can then produce their own law that shows the value of their individual state. So
yes, you're absolutely correct about that.
So that's what that is. But that message is getting completely misconstrued.
Yes.
Because what they want to say is the left wants to say is, see, this is a power grab from the right because they were able to have more justices. Mm-hmm. And again, we tell you that we need you all to come out and add more justices to overpower them, since our Constitution says that we can't change it. Which again is the same effect, right? Like if the Constitution says they're there for life, why would you pack it? Why don't you just change it to where you can be removed? But they don't want to do that. They want to fall in and add more people to it. Because it fits what their overarching goal is. Now, why they want to
it's the most direct route, because it would then take 3/4 of the states to be able to pass that constitutional limit, to be able to set an actual exact number and limit on that, or to be able to say that, or to really change the overall conjecture of what a Supreme Court justice can serve under.
Yep.
So yeah, they're taking the path of least resistance when that in that regard, and I agree with you 100% on that. Although I will say that I don't think this is, although the justices are sending this back are presumptively sending this back to the state, I don't see this as a states' rights issue as much as I see this as an individual, like this is the fetus's recognition of humanity and life in general, and they are essentially sending it back to the states to where you can then have a more localized and more what's the best way of putting it? The person that would be passing the legislation involving this would be more at risk of being overturned or being replaced as opposed to it being a federal level, because state legislatures are in continuous flux, always continuous flux. The federal legislators are they're not in this flux nearly as much.
Yeah, they run roughly around the same terms, but I mean, like their longevity. Yeah, their longevity is a lot higher. Like
when you look at Biden, who served for
40, 50 years, exactly. You know what I mean? Before he served 47 years before he became president.
Exactly.
Well, even in that, like your Madison situations are very rare.
Yes, that is one of the rarest occasions that happen in the congressional body.
Because a lot of times what will happen is your incumbents get more votes the second time, especially if they're new, than they do any other time.
Especially when it's an open seat and you have a mass flux into that seat to replace a member who was beloved in that area to begin with. And then you have an influx of other voters. And so part of the issue or part of the reason why Madison lost was specifically because of redistricting. They drew him into a more liberal area. and you had a lot of the more liberal and Democrat voters coming out and voting in that Republican primary, and they elected the guy who was not Trump endorsed.
Yeah, that was it. Well, I mean, North Carolina's been trending that way anyway.
Yeah. So, but yes. So the ultimate question is this going to work? Do we think that this intimidation factor or the threat of violence, the threat of death, the threat of the ultimate, for lack of a better term, the ultimate sacrifice in fulfilling your position, is that going to work? What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think that one thing that I realize is I think more and more of the American people are waking up, and this is another great awakening, right?
Yes.
Realizing that this garbage that has been going on, that everyone said that we were paranoid about, is actually coming to fruition.
I love that Babylon Bee title. Americans are running out of conspiracy theories because they're all coming true.
Yeah. Like, this is like, we told you so. Like, we told you they're going to try to find a way to pack the court. And immediately after a leak happened, which again has not happened ever in the history of America, in the history of the Constitution, this has never happened. So this one time that it happens, all of a sudden, the first thing they do is the left starts talking about not how this happened, not how does something happen for the first time in 200 years.
That they did.
They start talking about, like, we need to pack courts. Well,
Yes.
because that's what your entire intent was anyway. Like,
exactly.
you there's no telling who this person was, and you probably planted them to do that.
Yeah, you're right. In all honesty, I think that it was a clerk from a liberal-leaning justice's office.
Yep, I agree.
All right,
let's talk about baby formula.
Yeah. So is baby formula in 2022 the new 2020 toilet paper? Because we are seeing a nationwide shortage of baby formula, and we saw a massive national shortage of one of the most ridiculous items that you could possibly think of when the pandemic or the plandemic was orchestrated and initially began in 2020. We saw a massive amount and shortage of toilet paper. I mean, it's just one of the craziest things that you would never expect a crisis to evolve out of, but yet we have a actual real crisis going on in 2020.
So I haven't dabbled so much in it. Like, I've experienced it somewhat, because anyway, not to get too personal, but you can't find it nowhere. Like, anywhere. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to Walmart looking for formula and you can't find it. But what I think it's interesting is how it randomly happens. Before we get into like the subject of this and dabble really in the formula, right? In the South, when we hear snow, the shelves empty out of two things: milk and bread. Why? No one knows. No one really knows. Like
eggs. Well, eggs too.
Eggs too. But eggs are somewhat understandable because it's all the protein and everything else. And I guess I can kind of see the bread. Never really understood the milk.
Everybody's gonna make the sandwiches.
But even with, like, more so than eggs, bread and milk gone. Can't find it anywhere. And it's like we panic and we do that. Same thing similar happened with toilet paper, and even the manufacturers were like, why us? Like, I mean, Charmin was like, we're making it, but like, y'all keep buying it.
There was no governmental recall.
Yeah, like, and it's like, what is going on about this? Like, and so it's the same thing with formula. Now, I may have to go down a rabbit hole with this one.
Well, there may be some ghost peppers involved.
Exactly. Like, because when I start thinking about this formula thing, and what I do know slightly about it is this is really kind of a predominantly U.S. issue. Like, you can, and here's the other thing: it's only like if you're not buying in bulk, because the bulk warehouses or wholesalers can still get it.
Well, they can get it if it is not being shipped to the borders.
So yes.
So 40% of the nation's capacity of manufacturing this formula has essentially been turned off. The spigot has gone because of there was an issue where 4 infants they contracted a bacterial infection, and they essentially shut down the major producer of formula or baby formula. When it comes to baby formula, there are such specific requirements, regulations in regard to manufacturing that, because it has to contain the right fats, the right amino acids,
correct,
the right proteins, everything to really help nourish a newborn and budding life. But with these 4 infections that happened, essentially this manufacturer instituted a voluntary recall of all of their products, and the Biden administration essentially sent in their stormtroopers and took over this place, and have not been able or have not reopened these facilities for manufacturing yet, even still yet. So we have a national crisis that has evolved from this. We've actually had 2 infantile deaths that have been almost directly or essentially directly linked to this national shortage in Tennessee. So it has now become an almost an infanticide type of a deal, type of an emergency, and the Biden administration holds the ball in all of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really
that's one of them things where, like, for me personally, like, I'm spending more time trying to find it than I am looking at what happened to it. And it's I mean, it's a unique situation because, like you were saying, like, these things are broken down so specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I never want to be able to say that word specifically, that, like, it's you know, you have it versus, like, who's hyperallergenic versus, like, different age categories, because different age categories need different levels of protein. And you know, some people are like, you know, well, when do you switch to, you know, off of breast milk to formula to everything else? And they tell you, you know, each, depending on what book you read or what class or whatever, like, it tells you differently and all this other kind of stuff. And I mean, I had shared something at one point and I took it down because of the fact that I will say this, the USDA is very good when it comes to making sure that US products are good to a certain degree, right? Versus other countries. And what you see,
they're very good at regulation. I'll give you that.
Well, and what you see too is a lot of times you'll have, if you go out and try to find the same product in other countries, you won't be able to find it, or you'll find it differently. I think the only place that has a slightly better program, and that's really because they are more strict, is Europe, when it comes to real food versus organic. Well, like, organic versus processed versus, you know what I mean, like GMO'd and all that kind of stuff. I think that because we produce a lot more than you have, you know, the US is a little bit more variety, which it's a whole nother scary.
Well, which kind of leads into a little bit of this conversation. This topic is that the Biden administration just here recently passed what is known as Operation Fly Formula, which is essentially they are taking direct routes in connection with the Department of Defense and taking military flights and bringing in formula and formula ingredients from other countries.
Yeah.
So we are importing something that we should be manufacturing here at home, and that we have the capability and the capacity to manufacture here at home, and we're flying them in from other countries. I mean, it's sounding more and more like just about every single other issue or every single other commodity that we have here in America, because our medications, we bring in all that stuff from overseas.
Yep.
Oil, now that we are no longer self-sufficient and self-containing, we're bringing it in from overseas. We actually just reached out to Venezuela to see if they could ramp up production of oil.
That's awful.
We're everything that, and steel's another great one coming from China.
Which is a whole nother problem. We're gonna get into that in the next subject too. Because,
absolutely.
But because, like, so here's the other thing too. To stay on that topic of baby formula is, and I found this very interesting. You can go on Amazon, switch your location, right? Still type in your US address, but say you're in Canada, and you can get all the baby formula you want.
Yeah.
And Amazon will bring it into you and airdrop it. It'll take a couple days longer, but like the fact that we can get it from other countries, but like we have such a crisis in the U.S. means it's not an industry issue.
Yes,
and it goes back to the rabbit hole that we went down the other day, where I think Joe Biden and the administration may be trying to, we got something. There's something going on with our food processing.
Trying to starve us all.
I'm trying to keep my tinfoil hat in the closet, but
I forgot to make the tinfoil hat to hang on the stands here. But so the other day, Pete Buttigieg came out and said that the administration has been on top of this issue since day one. So essentially, they are saying that they have been aware of what's going on, and they have been formulating a plan. They have been cognizant of the potential the issues that are coming and that are going to take place, but yet only here recently, actually within the last week, have they actually started putting things into place. So have they really been on top of this since day one, or is that just one of the top talking points that Pete Buttigieg, the breastfeeding man, is putting out there to everybody?
I don't know, man.
I think I caught you off guard on the breastfeeding man part.
Yeah, because now I'm like, I don't know.
You're picturing and imagining that, aren't you?
Well, like here, rabbit hole, right? Like sidebar rabbit hole. This like brings up the issue that I saw with Calvin Klein, because I don't know if you've seen the new Calvin Klein cover.
I'm happy to say that I have not.
It's a pregnant man.
Of course it is.
And yeah.
Well, there was actually a woman today,
a pregnant woman who's taking testosterone.
Oh, well, no, there's a woman today that came before a select House committee and expressed testimony before Congress, said that men can be pregnant and have abortions.
What?
And apparently she missed the science class that I took in middle school and high school and college.
I'm pretty sure there's only 2 chromosomes that define what gender you're going to be.
Well, 2 explicit sets, yes.
Like, because and then sex versus gender. I don't want to go down that hole, but I just start thinking about things like that. Like that's the first thing that pops in my head. That's fundamentally changing some things.
So I'll put it this way. Let's continue down the rabbit hole a little bit on this. So another big deal and another big issue in regard to what we were discussing in one of our prior episodes about ghost peppers potentially being responsible for our decline in our food shortages. Inflation is really starting to take hold in regard. Well, not just inflation, but the lack of means to gain access to fertilizers. So you have a lot of farms that are not able to fertilize their fields, fertilize their pastures for not only growth of produce, but our production and production of cattle, because you have to fertilize the fields in an effort to grow the grass for the cattle to be able to graze and to grow, and to really be able to then put on weight and be produced as beef. And you need to fertilize the fields where you're planting your produce then to be able to produce a lot of that. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's upwards of 40 to 45%. And I'll really have to check my math on that and really go back into it. But 40 to 45% of the world's fertilizer comes out of Ukraine and Russia.
Interesting. It's really interesting. So when they go to war, which kind of makes sense, right? Because when you start looking at fertilizer and
Belarus.
And Belarus, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah.
When you start looking at it, makes sense for Ukraine, mainly because they have a large natural resource production and mining that goes on there, and inside
breadbasket of Europe.
And inside of fertilizer, you have all these minerals that have to be mixed inside the, certain soils or certain acidities and different things of that nature in order to produce certain crops. Certain fertilizers have to go on certain fields for certain things. In the U.S. as a cattle farmer, now it's mandatory that all fertilizer become with sporicides, so that you don't have, wild mushrooms growing
no more shrooms,
different things of that nature, you know. And so that's it's very interesting. Come to think about it, because when that kind of plays into some other things that we were talking about.
Yeah. So this whole orchestrated this. So, and again, rabbit hole a lot deeper down.
This episode should be called the rabbit hole.
Yeah, we'll just title it the rabbit hole. So you have the globalist society that says that the world can only sustain a population of a certain amount. So we see in a lot of industrialized countries, the population or at least the population growth start to really decline once they hit a certain production ability. So by reducing that production ability, you start to see a more rapid population decline. So you are no longer expanding the global population quite as much, because a lot of the countries that are being hit the hardest are places like Africa, places like China, places like India. It's where you're really starting to see the vast majority of these.
That's an interesting concept, because what you're saying is that is technically engineered versus where a lot of people in.
It's kind of contrary to where I was in the past.
Yeah, well, because where a lot of people in my area of the field view it as is, this is something that just your bubble burst.
Yes.
That's the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
You can only sustain so much, and your bubble has to burst. Then you have to find a new way to rebuild the infrastructure, or go out into a different method. And this is why a lot of times you'll see war. Is because you either have to do one or two things. You either have to innovate or you have to expand. Which
makes it very convenient for a nuclear war.
Well, so like,
which is what we're on the verge of.
Leading into, I guess you could say, starting to lead into our third topic. But before we go all the way into it, look at the choices that China and Russia are making.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Both of them are experiencing different economic issues at the same time, but they're both in the same general area. So they have to do one or two things: fight or partner, because either one's going to overrun the other one. But since they have the same core values, it's easier for them to partner. It's not like, one of them would be communist and the other one would be, capitalist. Then you would immediately see a conflict for the top part of that continent.
Yeah.
Whereas both of them are communists, so they're partnering and fighting for the same values on the other side. But they're facing the same issue at a different time. Russia cannot really restructure or rebuild its infrastructure as is, because they are limited on resources. So they have to expand. A lot of people wonder why Ukraine. Well, Russia made it so far because they were originally the USSR, which had all the Slavic nations and a good portion of the Middle East, right? So when we take all that away at the end of the Cold War, and the USSR fail, they're now trying to regain that territory, and they're being strategic about how they get it back. China, on the other hand,
I would say they're also being provoked in a sense as well.
Well, we'll put that to the side for a second, right? Because that's what happens when crazy leads, okay? But you know what I mean? Because like there's strategy, and then there's poking a bear that you know is crazy for a reason.
Yes, literally.
So then on the China side, right? China is getting ready to experiencing the same industrial revolution that we did with textiles mills,
mm-hmm.
which would eventually, as we know, leads to at some point a bubble busting. And when you track the history of where the Chinese government is gone, whenever they need to print more money, they devalue their currency. Well, you can only devalue your currency so far before you're Zimbabwe, and it ain't worth nothing.
Or Germany post World War II.
Exactly. And it's not worth anything. So then combine the two, right? You got Russia, who's going out here trying to get resources, who, as a lot of people don't know, we haven't really dabbled into on the show, Ethereum, which is the second largest cryptocurrency, is built
mm-hmm.
and maintained primarily in Russia. And there is, in crypto circles, there is this theory that part of this push for this war right now is to see if crypto has the longevity, because the one way to see if your currency can last is to go to war with it. And there's also been discussion about, moving, when people come off the dollar standard and you come, you're saying to the IMF, there's nothing that they can do for you anymore. The only way that you can do it is to test whatever you're trying to back your currency with. Venezuela we've seen a lot of this, right? The last time that you could say it was attempted without a large pushback, and by that meaning I'm meaning like their leader dying, just getting replaced
or murdered,
in the middle of the street, was with Venezuela, right? And then Venezuela itself, a lot of people don't know this either. When Venezuela crashed, because they tried to back their entire currency off of their oil production, they then tried to switch their currency to a digital currency that mimicked their oil production. So then it was all in flux. So the more oil they sell, the higher their digital currency rose in value, and then they would be able to distribute out to their people, and then that's how they were going to do it, right? Russia has taken on a similar, in theory, a method. No one has been able to truly confirm it outside of the fact of now you're starting to see some of those theories come to light as they push in to Ukraine to gather the resources that are necessary to produce more and more of these digital assets. China's the same way. They're devaluing their fiat currency, and they are the largest miner of Bitcoin and all these other things. So I say all that to say this: when you start to see these two large economic powerhouses getting ready to go through a recession and depression at the same time, they hit fight or flight mode. And some are fleeing towards how do we innovate, and some are fleeing for how do we conquer. And that goes back to what we're talking about, poking a crazy bear.
Yeah. So if provoked, or if really cornering Russia, and there's the idea that the whole us really pushing a lot of the resources into Ukraine and really putting NATO into the position that they are as far as really supporting Ukraine and all of this is to really substantially limit and reduce the amount of resources that Russia has in a war capability. So if you reduce a country down to essentially their last means of of defense or attack, or however you want to characterize that, and that last line being the nuclear option, what's to say that they don't press that big red button?
Yeah, because they got enough to lose.
Exactly. Especially when you know that if you do lose, or when you do lose this, or again, if you lose this, then you're likely going to be brought up before the ICC, the International Criminal Court.
Mm-hmm.
So
if they were to survive, and then then you have the power vacuum.
Yeah, and then
right,
exactly.
Which is how we got in a lot of situations that we're already in. When again back to the the USSR when it fell, and the power vacuum that occurred without knowing the people who live in the Slavic nations or the Middle East, there were arbitrary lines that were drawn. You put people who have been fighting since before Jesus in the same country, and you wonder why, they can't get along. And it's because we didn't get in and knew what was going on. Mm-hmm. And now, they're just continuing a war that's been going on since the beginning of time.
Yes.
When that happens, you create these power vacuums, which is how you get these dictators, which is how you get these unsustainable regions. And the same thing will happen in Russia or China if it is not, if conquering or, stability of some kind is not handled properly. A minor glimpse of that outside of that on more on the China side was look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British territory for a long time.
Yeah.
And then when it went back to the People's Republic of China, and they started protesting it because these people have been living under capitalism and freedom forever, Like, they let it exist for a little while, and then what happened? You saw one video of them beating the hell out of people, and the Chinese government said, this is over. They beat the hell out of them. The next thing you know is the leader of Hong Kong was whoever the Chinese people wanted, and you never heard anything else about it. Never again.
And you're absolutely right about that. So to really kind of, I guess, to dig us back out of the hole we dug ourselves into, Speaker Pelosi had made a statement in regard to the whole baby formula shortage issue. She was talking about how Americans have the absolute right to protect the most vulnerable of us, but I guess she neglected to consider that all the fetuses that were aborted while she was talking and saying those words. But she said that there may be a potential that somebody needs to be indicted over this, over the shortage issue or the shortage of the baby formula issues. Do you think she was essentially making a confession? Was she saying, "Hey,
She's
my party screwed up"?
She's alluding to something, and she don't agree with whoever she's alluding it to it being done. I don't know about that woman. She scares me sometimes because, like,
she's a witch.
Well, like, think about it. You know just well as I do. Like, people like that, like, when they strike at a certain time, and if she feels
she's very calculated.
Very calculated. If she feels that she can strike them, by them I mean president and vice president, knowing that, like, she's in line after them, like, that's terrifying in a sense.
Oh yeah, especially if they retake the House, or if in the very slim possibility they retake the House, and then this puts Biden and if they retake the House, they would, the likelihood of impeachment and moving forward into the Senate is so slim and narrow, it's almost not worth mentioning. But at the same time, if that were to happen and they were to impeach the president and vice president, that puts her in direct succession. So we kind of get to our last our last subject, and what we were wanting to talk about is the Green New Deal policy,
which kind of goes into what we were talking about.
Yes,
earlier with the resources across the globe.
Because
one thing I don't think a lot of people think about, whenever we hear the left and, like, these outlandish policies from the Green New Deal, they start talking about, like, we got to get off the use of fossil fuels, and they start talking about more electric cars, right?
Yeah, that's the big key, is the electric cars.
That's, like, so minimum when it comes to what oil is in.
Yes,
oil is in our hair products. It is in our shoes. It is in the rubber in our tires. It is in
the plastics that make up the vehicles.
The plastics that make up the vehicles. It is in the plastic that make up our bottles. It is like
the plastics that make up the batteries that are going to be used to provide energy for the electrical vehicles.
It's in our asphalt. It is in our steel. It is in our aluminum, our clothes. Like, it is in football, like the football itself. So think about all the things whenever someone starts talking about we're going to be off of fossil fuels, I always want you to remember that means no more football. that means no more hair products. That means no more tennis shoes as we see them today.
No more baseball, because that's in the lining of the stitches.
Yep. No more baseball. No more asphalt. So when they start talking about repairing potholes and they start talking about taking away fossil fuels, remember, we do not have a way to make asphalt that does not include fossil fuels. When you
effectively,
when you lay down asphalt, just realize that's mixed with non-ethanol fuel. That's how they lay it down. If you lay it with diesel, it breaks up.
And the whole infrastructure program that they passed, that's going to rebuild all the bridges and rebuild all the roads and everything along that line, or at least the less than 20% of it that they say is going towards
like
that.
The concrete jungle of California that says that they want to be fossil fuel independent by the time in 2035 would not be able to sustain the roads that it's on. Because now I will say this, California has been trying to come out with this idea of changing renewable plastic into asphalt, but it's nowhere near like the level that it can be yet. Like these have only been tested in a few places, only in California, and it's not worked that well.
Well, let's put it this way. So the petroleum that they are trying to get rid of is an essential part of what is needed and is necessary to create the charging stations for these electric vehicles that they are wanting to do. Just in the structure alone of the actual charging station mechanism, it's oil is essentially a necessary component in manufacturing that in total.
This really goes back to those things, a lot of people who see this a lot, like ourselves, realize that the first generations of policies sometimes are really wrong because someone didn't do their homework. They just had they had
the talking point.
Yeah, they had the moxie at the time to get a bunch of people behind them and get the votes, but really didn't do their homework on what the bill actually said.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you try to implement the bill, you realize like how messed up it is. So you got to come back and fix it because then it looks bad on everybody else.
Yeah,
because so many people signed on to get it passed. That's going to be the Green New Deal.
Oh yeah, or at least the Build Back Better.
All of it. Infrastructure bill, Green New Deal, Build Back Better. All three of those things are very key components that lean on each other, and they all try to talk about removing or reducing our carbon footprint and our fossil fuel usage, but all of them require a large fossil fuel usage in order to happen.
Yeah. So the infrastructure program is the Green New Deal Part 1. Build Back Better is the complementary and the completion of the Green New Deal.
And so we went down the rabbit hole earlier talking about
just a little bit.
Yeah, but like Russia and China, right?
Yes.
Same thing. The reason why Russia has been able to produce so much oil for everyone, not just because they have it, but is because you have these emerging markets that are now going through these early industrial age stages. And so when we went through it so early in the United States and in Europe, we were affected differently. We were able to boom faster, right? They're going through it around the same era as technology, so they can be a little bit more innovative in it. But because of that, they're having to use more of those products, right?
Yes.
Give you an example. Something like, what is it? 10.5 million barrels of oil a day is what Russia sells to China. 10.5 million barrels a day. And that largely is because, think about it, China's building a lot larger skyscrapers than we have. All that steel has to have oil inside of it. They're redoing all of their roads. China's gone into an infrastructure bank with India and a few other partners.
Silk Road.
They're rebuilding the Silk Road, and they're actually making it a roadbedway. Like, all of it. You have to have oil to produce the computers, to produce, think about everything that's Apple, right? Still has oil in it.
Oh yeah, and
your cell phones go away if we don't have oil.
Yes, and a large part of that, we hear the term renewable.
Yep.
And the term renewable in of itself is a fallacy, simply because the term renewable is in essence as far as tangible items like a sheet of paper here. You recycle a sheet of paper. A sheet of paper is it has a finite number of times that it can be recycled before it is processed and degraded to the point to where it is no longer able to be used again because of the breakdown process that is used to really make it into another raw material.
To take out all the ink and all the other dye that was in it to put it back together. Like, you can only do that so much time. That's the same thing as like when you crumble a piece of paper. You know what I mean?
Well,
like you were saying,
you look at plastics. Plastics the same way. It's a chemical breakdown process. It has to be melted down and it has to be restructured into a new product. But by chemically breaking it down and melting it, you are essentially destroying the molecular composition of that product, and it is no longer able to maintain the integrity that it had before. Same thing with metal. So think of it this way. You are building a brand new building here in the United States, and you're using all 100% recycled steel and everything on that. Imagine what would happen if we got to the point to where the recycled steel that we're using has been broken down chemically so many times that it no longer has the structural integrity that it happened.
That it warps.
Exactly. You have what happened in Florida.
Yeah.
When the buildings collapsed on each other.
Because you essentially what you have is you have a lower melting point of steel.
Yes.
And these precious metals. You know, and going back to the plastic thing, like how is it? The bottling companies have now like come together because, like, imagine this, right? And everybody knows, you know, we talk about it, especially in politics, like Coke versus Pepsi, right? Woke versus not. Anyway,
Pepsi after 2020.
But even all the bottling companies have come together and said we only have 8 to 9% of the plastic that people put in the recycling bin can actually be recycled and reused. So they're coming together to try to figure out a way to increase that percentage because they bottle so much and they produce so many plastic materials.
Same thing with aluminum and a lot of canning.
Yep.
And a lot of bottling as well. You're seeing the point to where a lot of the resources that we have currently are no longer being able to be used in the same capacity that they were before. So if you have, say, for instance, aluminum that was made to produce a soup can, well, when it's broken down, it has to go into a Coke can. If it's broken down again, it's going to have to go into something that's not able to withstand the same amount of pressure and integrity again, because it's not chemically able to be held together.
Well,
yeah. So
just be cautious when people start telling you about how great the Green New Deal is. Remember, when the Green New Deal comes through in the era that they want it to, they're basically saying that you have to remake a football because football can't be the same way that it was anymore.
Absolutely. Well, as long as it's the NFL, I'm good with that.
Ooh, I don't know about that. Football's football to me. I'll even watch some of that USFL or whatever that is now.
Well, I mean, that's better than NFL. So, as always, we always ask and remind you to continue to like and share any content that we produce and put out there in the public sphere by actually hitting the like button or even commenting on anything that you see that we've put out there and produce. It actually increases our standing within that platform and allows more people to see it. More interaction means more people see it.
Absolutely.
Essentially. Always hit the share button and really get it out there and make sure that all your friends and neighbors and your quote unquote social friends see it and put it out there. And if you're able to, please go to our website that's listed on the screen right there in front of you, conservativetalk.org. Hit the sponsor tab in the top right-hand corner or the bottom right-hand corner and become a monthly sponsor for our show, because we really rely on our monthly sponsors to be able to continue to produce this and to really be able to continue to push this message out as far and wide as we are.
We couldn't do this without our current sponsors, and we thank you all for it. Thank you so much for it. And, once again, thank you for joining us on Conservatives Talk.
Well, before we do that, let's remind them about the election day.
Time. I was waiting for you to do that. That's why I want to do that. So we got 3 days to the primary.
Yes.
3 days to the primary and 173 days until we beat Stacey Abrams again. And I think this is another perfect time to remind them that if you haven't already voted in the Georgia primary, Tuesday is the last day. Get out to the polls, flood the polls, and vote.
Yes, make sure that you get out there and express your opinion, because your opinion is essentially the only thing that you really have in regard to this election, at least for the primaries. And if you do not express it and you do not vote, anything that comes afterwards is your fault.
It's your fault. You know what I mean? You can't gripe about it if you didn't get out and vote.
Exactly. So as always, thank you for putting up with Jamie and I's antics today. And we look forward to seeing y'all again next week.